Hey, BC here. Welcome to BC Nephro. Today I'm going to talk about potassium, specifically hyperkalemia, and a way to think about an approach to the diagnosis of hyperkalemia. If you're interested in more information, click on the link in the description below to bcnephro.com, where you'll find a blog article on this and other things. You'll find a way to email me, brian@bcnephro.com, and with your questions or comments. So the way I like to think about hyperkalemia is the way I like to think about most things renal, and that is a framework for diagnosis here. So first, is it real? And second, if it's real, is it because there's too much in? Is it because there's too little out? Or is it because it's in the wrong place of the body? So I'm going to go through this approach here. First, is it real? If there's hyperkalemia that's not real, it's called pseudo-hyperkalemia. So what is pseudo-hyperkalemia? Pseudo-hyperkalemia is that the potassium is actually normal in the body, but when it's run in the lab, you get a high result. So why does this happen? Well, this happens for the main reason why this happens is most of the potassium in the body is inside of the cells, and it's for some reason it leaks out of the cells on the way to the lab. Now, this occurs in conditions like this. First, severe thrombocytosis. So the platelet count is above 1 million. You can think about this. Second, it can happen in severe leukocytosis. Platelet count greater than 100,000, white blood count greater than 100,000. Think about this. There are some congenital things that can cause this, and then there's also hemolysis that we all know about. The lab typically reports this, so that's pretty easy to figure out. So if this is the case, how do you figure this out? So the way you figure it out is you send a specimen to the lab that doesn't have these, that does something to the white blood cells and platelets that don't let the potassium leak out. So this occurs with it. Pseudo-hyperkalemia occurs with a serum specimen. So you would want to send a plasma specimen or a whole blood specimen where this will not occur. So typically, if you're sending a plasma specimen to the lab, you would have to send a green top. That's the plasma specimen. Now, what about blood gas? So the blood gas specimens, you may get a discrepancy in potassium. So one thing to think about this is when the blood gas is run, sent to the respiratory therapist, run through the blood gas machine, that there's not a process there to report hemolysis like there is in the clinical lab. So one possibility to get actually a falsely elevated potassium on a blood gas specimen would be that there's hemolysis that was not recognized or reported. However, if you do an arterial blood gas, that's typically done on whole blood, and that may be a way to exclude pseudo-hyperkalemia because a whole blood specimen doesn't have this. It's the serum specimen that has this artifact. All right, so we know we've ruled this out. It's real. So now let's move on to the other things. So first, too much in. Now, maybe I can see this for acute hyperkalemia. Can't really see this for chronic hyperkalemia. Pretty hard to do. The thing is this. The kidneys are really amazing at getting rid of potassium. Now, back in the day when the kidneys evolved, there was a lot more potassium in the diet than there is today. So the kidneys have an amazing capacity. They can upregulate and increase more potassium. So back in the day, people weren't eating food out of cans and the boxes when the kidneys were evolving. They were eating not processed food essentially. So which had a lot more potassium. The kidneys can get rid of a lot of potassium, can upregulate. Pretty difficult to overwhelm that. You might see it maybe acutely, but not chronically. Now this next thing I'm going to talk about is cellular shifts. Now, likewise, cellular shifts are a cause of acute, but since the kidneys can upregulate, wouldn't be a cause of chronic hyperkalemia. So cellular shifts, why do they occur? Well, there's a couple reasons. First reason is that the cells die, break down, and everything gets released, and most of the potassium is intracellular. So why can the cells break down and release? Well, you're going to see this in a couple of things. Well, one is if the patient's in shock, anaphylactic acidosis, tissue necrosis, you'll see this, and you'll be able to recognize it because there'll be lactic acidosis going on. Second, if the muscle cells are dying because there's rhabdomyolysis, you'll see this as well. The third thing is if you're killing the white blood cells because you're treating leukemia, you get tumor lysis, you'll see this. So that's the first: cells die, potassium gets out. The second is the potassium is shifting from one reason, from the intracellular to the extracellular space. Now, there's a couple reasons for this. One reason is acidosis. I'll tell you what they say is they don't observe this in a respiratory acidosis. They observe this in a metabolic acidosis, and they observe this in what they refer to as a mineral metabolic acidosis, as opposed to an organic metabolic acidosis. So what is that? So a mineral metabolic acidosis is essentially the addition of acid to the blood, the addition of protons, and those shift out of hydrochloric acid, essentially. And this you can really think about as a normal anion gap, or a non-anion gap, a non-increased anion gap acidosis. Now, what are the organic acidosis? So ketoacidosis and lactic acidosis are what they call organic acidosis. And these acidoses apparently are not supposed to cause, the acidosis is a part of it, is not supposed to cause hyperkalemia. But we obviously know we see hyperkalemia in both these cases. So why? Well, in lactic acidosis, we know because the cells are dead and everything's spilling out. In ketoacidosis, diabetic ketoacidosis, is really because there's an osmotic gradient. The sugar's so high, it's pulling the water out of the cells, and what's pulling the water is pulling potassium with it. So that's the cause there. Some other causes of cellular shifts, but those are the big ones. Now, where your money is at for chronic hyperkalemia is too little out. And too little out means too little out from the kidneys. Now, one thing I would like to highlight is that decreased GFR alone is not a good explanation. So chronic kidney disease by itself is not an explanation for too little out, because the kidneys have a remarkable capacity to upregulate potassium excretion. So there's something else going on, and the distal nephron is where the money's at. So what's going on is at the distal nephron, normally sodium is reabsorbed in, potassium is secreted out, and aldosterone is what makes that happen. So the problem, if there's chronic hyperkalemia, the problem with the kidney is there's either not enough sodium getting to the distal tubule, or there's a problem with the aldosterone. So what is the problem with the sodium? So volume depletion, heart failure, some other things, not enough sodium getting to the distal tubule. That will be one reason. Now, the channel that sucks up the sodium in is called the ENaC channel, so there could be a problem with the sodium getting absorbed in. So this is like medications, potassium-sparing diuretic amiloride, triamterene, some medications, the trimethoprim component of trimethoprim sulfa, Bactrim, these things. Or there's this congenital defect here, pseudo-hypoaldosteronism type 1, I think. But so that's that. What can be the problem with aldosterone? Well, there can either be a resistance to aldosterone or not enough aldosterone being made. Spironolactone, other aldosterone antagonists, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, hyporeninemic hypoaldosteronism, things like this. So these are the causes of really where the money's at for chronic hyperkalemia. So that's it for today. Please leave your comments below. Subscribe to the channel. Visit bcnephro.com. Email me. And I hope you have a good one. Till next time.